Some days I can't help but think how easily life can get you down. Just turn on the news and it feels like the world is spinning out of control. And of course, it doesn't help that our brains are literally hardwired to favor bad news over good. And so, while not perfect, I am very intentional about focusing on the positive. Because leaders must find the positive and remain optimistic to bring us all forward. And that is exactly why I spoke to my guest today, who is indeed a natural optimist. Stay tuned. Welcome to Invest Insights. I'm your host, Abby Lindenberg. Today, I am joined by businessman and energy champion, Marco Alvera. Alvera earned his degree in philosophy and economics from the London School of Economics and later co-founded Natesi, the first broadband ADSL company in the Italian market. He has managed the European gas and power portfolio at Eni and held several leadership positions at Snam. Currently, he serves as the CEO of Tree Energy Solutions. Alvera is also co-founder of the nonprofit Fondazione Kenta. As a believer in optimism and action, Alvera has a passion for the environment and sustainability and wants to make sure his children and future generations will still be able to enjoy the world as we know it. Marco, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Abby. Good to see you.
Well, I've been learning a lot about your background. I watched your TED Talk, and I'm so interested in our conversation today, from your experience in the energy realm and sustainability to your influence that your daughters have on you. But how about we start from the beginning? You grew up in Venice, Italy, and you have mentioned that has had an impact on your view of the world. And I think most of us think of Venice as this beautiful tourist destination with gondolas and riverways. But tell us what it was like growing up there as a kid.
So I had this big contrast. I was actually born in New York, and I lived in New York till I was 10, but my family home was in Italy and in Venice indeed. And you have this kind of constantly changing city in Manhattan, and you have this never changing city in Venice, because the landscape, everything you look at, the skyline, it's been the same for 500 years, and hopefully it's going to be the same for another 500 years. So you have this very strong contrast. What Venice does, which is the opposite of New York, it's a really allows you to reflect on and put things into perspective, because life is going to pass and generations are going to pass, and the city's still going to have the same look and the same feel and the same history and the same culture. So I think it kind of puts man in a humble perspective, as opposed to kind of that New York attitude sometimes we have being a New Yorker, that we want to change the world. And I think, I grew up with this contrast, and hopefully I'm trying to get the best of both worlds.
What was your first job, and how did it shape you?
So I studied philosophy and economics, and it was macroeconomics, not business. And then I went straight into banking at Goldman Sachs in London. I was doing first M&A and then private equity. And so I was really trained to be an investment banker. That's what these firms do, especially at the beginning. So it's one of the best ways to learn about finance. And you also learn a little bit of that culture of meritocracy, of, you need to work really, really hard to keep your job. And if you really exceed and excel, you get a big bonus. And that kind of banking culture, which is not unique to that firm, indeed, it's kind of a global theme across that industry. So I'm really grateful for what I learned. And it kind of, the beginning of my work life was really kind of performance driven.
You're so many things: a business executive, a founder, a TED talker, an author. You founded a nonprofit to promote STEM among women. You're a leading backer of global sustainability efforts. One might say that you are rather ambitious. Where do you get your ambition?
I think it's really that, I would say it's that combination of really American kind of everything is possible attitude. But also that kind of being able to think about the long term, which is probably more of an Italian thing, probably more of a Renaissance thing. And I think we're really living through a possible Renaissance of a lot of the sustainability related themes. So I had the luxury of having a mentor when I shifted career after Goldman. I was an entrepreneur building my own telecom company. We were doing cloud computing in 2000. Then I went to work for Enel, which is a very successful, very large state-owned Italian utility. And then I went to work for Eni, which is another state-owned Italian oil and gas company. And just the culture difference between my kind of Goldman days or banking days, where it's all about performance and bonuses and trying to keep your job really, to a situation where suddenly you're in a much more almost relaxed environment where you're still working really hard, but you're not scared to lose your job every kind of quarter. And you're not going to get a huge bonus if you do anything different from your colleagues. So it's much less meritocratic. And I was really, really lucky to get the confidence of being able to lead large teams and develop complex projects and deal with very complex political issues, buying gas in Libya from Gaddafi, in Russia, in Venezuela, dealing with people like Chavez, building like large infrastructure projects in Alaska and offshore Norway. So having the confidence of seeing stuff go from like an idea to like steel in the ground and a project that operates, I think that's what's giving me the confidence that I understand the energy industry. I've been 20 years in this industry, and I think we can really change the world. We need a little bit more of a West Coast attitude and mentality in the energy industry, which has hardly been disrupted.
You mentioned some really big names, Gaddafi and Chavez. What are some of the big takeaways from your experience working with those types of individuals?
I think it's more than the individuals. It's really working a lot in Africa, working in developing countries. Enrico Mattei was the founder of ENI, and the DNA of ENI and then SNAM, which is a spin-off of ENI, where I was a CEO. It's called Modello Mattei in Italy. It's just a way of doing business where you're really always looking at the interests of the hosts where you're working. There's no oil in Switzerland, so you have to go where the oil is. You don't have the luxury of deciding where to put your factory like you can do if you're in another business. You have to follow the oil, and the oil is in Iraq, it's in Russia, it's in the Middle East, it's in Alaska, it's in Venezuela. And so this unique Italian model, this Motte model of being really fair with the local communities, of maybe giving up some of the profit, leaving some more profit on the table for the indigenous people or the local governments, wasn't really a bad choice, because then when the push came to shove, it's almost like you're spending insurance money, because you're creating this alliance and this constituents who are going to be there to support you in difficult times. So that's been the biggest lesson learned. If you're fair and if you treat people like respecting it's their country, it's their oil, you're helping them produce their oil as opposed to going and extract and take a concession and say, this is, I paid for this is mine. No, if you always respect and you're always fair over the distance, it really pays off.
Well, that concept of fair, you talked about that in your TED Talk in 2017, and you brought up fairness as a surprising ingredient that makes businesses work better. Some people might argue that businesses still really haven't incorporated fairness in their approaches. First, who do you accredit to inspiring your feeling of fairness?
I think the beauty is that the feeling is innate. So a friend of mine, David Rock, who's an expert in neuroscientist, he's been writing several books on this and coaching on it. He told me once, about 10 years ago, that the human brain is attracted to, he calls it the SCARF model: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And for me, the SCAR was really clear: status, certainty, autonomy, and relatedness. It makes sense that people will be attracted to these features. But fairness, I was like, really? I feel it, but is it universal? And he's like, absolutely. So he showed me a video of like really, like, I think 1-year-olds or maybe even like toddlers, and from all over the world. So it cuts across geographies. And these little kids see this like little cartoon where I think there's like a triangle going up and then like a square pushing the triangle down and a ball helping the triangle go up, like super basic. And all the kids want to play with the circle that's helping the triangle as opposed to the square that's stopping the triangle from pursuing its feet. So this universal idea that we're all born with an innate sense of fairness, for me, was a huge eye-opener. And it resonated very well. And that really triggered me to look around and try to figure out, how could my colleagues in these state-run utilities or oil and gas companies who are earning, frankly, less than some of their US peers, didn't have any risk of being fired, more or less. How could they be performing better? Because that was so contrary to the culture that I had seen in my earlier years. And I just came to the conclusion that fairness is good for business. People perform better. It's like a jazz band. People, when they're relaxed, they just perform better than if they're like constantly either trying to overachieve or very defensive, trying to not do anything wrong. And if you just, I don't want to say the businesses should be relaxed, but you should create an environment of trust. I think fairness really helps. It's not easy to do because it means doing the right thing and not the most convenient thing. And so in companies, we have this obligation every quarter to do quarterly EPS reporting. And there's so much pressure I see on US companies, on the CEOs, on the CFOs, on the IR guys every quarter to beat expectations. And sometimes, to be fair, you need to take a bit of a longer term view. But I think it's the best investment you can make.
Absolutely. And how are you currently making that investment? What are the mechanisms or the culture that you've created? And what keeps you motivated to continue that path?
Well, I think it's ultimately about being authentic and getting people to see you for what you are, and really allowing people to perform in a state where they can trust you and know what to expect. And so it's just a trait. It's something that I've learned it works. And I always look, when I look for leaders, at who follows them. And I'm very honored to have people working with me now that I've worked with before. And sometimes I've worked with them maybe 15 years ago. And maybe we've each changed companies and then they still want to follow you. So I think that's the best kind of trait to look for when you look for leadership. Like, who's following them? Who's followed them in their career? Who's with them now that has known them for 15 years? I think that's the greatest guarantee. That's what I look for when I hire people.
You've been described as an optimist, and you remain optimistic in a world that seems very challenging. Just this morning, I was listening to a podcast about PFAS and, the chemicals that will live in our bodies forever. And, I think of the wars in Ukraine and Gaza, and I'm thinking of global warming. How do you stay positive in a world that can be very challenging?
I think the world is challenging, and I do worry, and I do wake up in the middle of the night with thoughts, and I try not to watch television and to stay away from these cycles of repetitive videos that are actually really scary. I'm optimistic. I would say I try to be grounded in my optimism and have it be a fact-based optimism as opposed to a just general kind of irresponsible sense of optimism. And there's one thing, you mentioned two things which are very close to my heart, which is climate change and kind of climate sustainability and energy sustainability, and that kind of social sustainability. On the energy side, we have to really start with a very basic number. Solar energy today costs $10 per megawatt hour, and oil today costs $60 a megawatt hour. So wherever it's sunny, you can produce energy when it's sunny, of course, at a fifth, a quarter, 1/6 of the cost of oil. So this very basic fact, which is very different from 10, 15 years ago when solar energy was costing 10 or 20 times more than oil. Now it costs, say, a quarter because oil keeps moving, solar keeps getting lower and lower. So we call it PPWS, put the panels where it's sunny. That's kind of what my job is, to go and put the panels in the deserts, put the panels in, it can be a Spanish desert, it can be a desert in Texas, it can be a desert in North Africa and the Middle East, harvest that sun and turn it into something that we can then move across the world, converting it into natural gas, putting in cables, putting in batteries. There's many ways to do it. My main job in TESS is to convert it into natural gas. My partners in another company are doing it through long distance cables, but the concept is the same. Put the panels where it's sunny, of course, the wind turbines where it's windy. That makes me hugely optimistic because we need to get away gradually from fossil fuels, but with a model that's economically sustainable, that's socially sustainable, that addresses the affordability question of energy, that addresses the fact that you still have 1 billion people in Africa with no access to energy. So on energy, I'm optimistic. I don't know if it's going to take 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years. It does greatly matter for the climate, but we'll get there. And my job as an energy entrepreneur is to try to get there as soon as possible, accelerating, scaling up, deploying the best technologies, working in partnerships. Luckily, we're working in partnership with the strongest energy companies in the world. We're working in partnership with Total. We're working in partnership with some of the Japanese companies. We're working in partnership with other French companies, international companies. We signed an agreement with ADNOC, one of the world's biggest oil companies, really to scale up some of these mega renewable energy projects. On the social, more human, kind of geopolitical, but really social front, I think AI, if we do kind of some boundaries to it, so it's kind of regulated in a way that it doesn't kind of take us off track, especially when it comes to military uses of AI. If it's properly confined without too much regulation, is going to be really a force for the good, because AI has no ego. AI solves naturally for global optimization of resources, whereas when you put greed into the equation, because we're all born with a sense of fairness, but life brings us sometimes away from that, as we all have our traumas, and some people react to trauma with fear and rage and greed. So AI is a world without greed. So the more power we give AI, in a sense, in terms of allocating resources, whether it's in a team, whether it's in a company, whether it's in a university, in a city, I think we're going to get to a world with greater and cheaper resources. But I'm also really excited, and I mentioned the word renaissance before. I think there's finally a convergence taking place between a lot of ancient traditions, whether it's meditation, yoga, whether it's kind of Japanese yoga or Japanese meditation or Indian yoga, or even Russian kind of ancient monasteries. That's where they really learn how to breathe. There's a great book by James Nestor called Breath. There's neuroscience I mentioned before, my friend, but many other great neuroscientists. There's a lot of books out there. So a lot of these disciplines that have always been independent are now converging to really help well-being. And when you want to live well within your body, you want to live well in nature, you want to protect the environment. So there's a lot of synergies. And a lot of doctors are now finally able to demonstrate in the lab the benefit of meditation, the benefit of proper sleep, the benefit of proper breathing. These things were kind of qualitative until a few years ago. I think they're becoming mainstream, they're becoming more scientific, and I think that's also going to be another great force for the good.
Absolutely. I've actually been thinking a lot about meditation and mental health recently. Specifically, I have a 4-year-old daughter, and I am thinking about how a smartphone, social media will eventually fit in her life, and been doing a lot of research on Gen Z and how the advent of the smartphone has drastically changed their childhood. And I'm frankly quite scared. And I am a active meditator and have been trying to instill wellness into our company, Capital Analytics. What are some of the ways that you are practicing mindfulness or meditation or all the things that you just spoke to personally and maybe professionally?
So super, super important. Just do nasal breathing. That's super easy to do. You can learn it in a few weeks. You can put some tape on your mouth when you go to bed. But just nasal breathing and knowing how you can just instantly relax by doing a long out breath. Very basic, hugely effective. I do yoga nidra, which means sleeping in Sanskrit. It's super relaxing. I do some normal meditation, but I get distracted quite easily, so I enjoy it more. I follow Joe Dispenza, some of that stuff. I mean, there's some really, really cool guided meditation practices out there. I do some yoga. Not enough. I don't exercise enough. But I think it's really important. I think it really clears the mind. If I'm traveling, it clears a jet lag. It helps focus, helps put things into perspective. But I'm really into breathing right now, and how breathing can be a pocket tool that they should teach every child at school. Yeah.
Yeah. I often forget to breathe, and I have to be in the moment and say, wait a second, I am not breathing right now. It's strange how the body can do that.
Oh, another super cool thing is, and it really, you just need 30 seconds. If you just whilst you breathe, if you just think of your heart, just focalize on your, like, just put your mind, your attention on your heart, and then you think of your daughter and the love of your daughter when she was born, or whatever, or your brother, or even a pet or a tree, whatever, what, any positive, like, you do it for 30 seconds, like, deeply, and then you, like, your kind of your biology, you just, it just changes your perspective. You may need to do it after another hour if you're watching the news again, but
Well, maybe two.
yeah.
Well, to jump back to sustainability, you've been uh, working in this sustainability realm for some time now. But as you mentioned at the top of our conversation, you had a very different start to your career path. What was the moment where you knew, or what was impacting you to change your career trajectory to focus on these sustainability efforts?
So I think I've always tried to be sustainable in my jobs. So I've always been very focused on the well-being of my teams and kind of the personal well-being, but also the team's well-being and the company's well-being. In terms of, so I would separate the kind of the individual sustainability from the climate sustainability. On climate, frankly, it was for business. I mean, I was really disturbed. I'm an avid skier and sailor and swimmer, and I've always been an environmentalist at heart. There's nothing I like more than just walking in the woods. And if I see a piece of plastic in the sea or in the woods, I get really upset. But being in oil and gas, I kind of felt it was my job to keep people's homes warm and the lights on. And I always felt this kind of struggle. Like, I know I'm doing good at my job, but I know I'm not doing good to the planet. And how does this work? And then I met my one of my business partners, Paddy, who, by the way, we call him the Usain Bolt of solar. He has the 5 records of the cheapest solar. So he's a guy who got to $10 a megawatt hour. And he just explained he was doing these mega projects mainly in the Middle East. And starting probably 6 years ago, 7 years ago, he really opened my eyes to how cheap renewable energy had become. And because sometimes in energy, you're planning for 20-year cycles. So I was, like, still looking at costs that were historically relevant, but not today. So he really opened my eyes to that. And then in SNAM, we did a lot of work on hydrogen, a lot of work on biomethane, a lot of work on batteries and energy efficiency, and on sustainable mobility. And so I just saw it as a phenomenal way to combine my passion for the climate, my passion for business, my passion as an entrepreneur, my passion for broader sustainability. And I really wanted to do it at scale and not be constrained by any governance or any kind of large company mentality, and really get the best people I could hire in the world and have fun and grow big businesses that are essentially made of projects. So my job is to take a project and find the right team and find the right capital, find the right contracts, and then have it grow. And that way we can scale up.
And you've also been a voice for diversity, recognizing the importance of encouraging women to take an interest in STEM, for example. You have even helped create Fondazione Kenta, a community space for diverse backgrounds. What fueled your desire and to be a personal champion in the fight for diversity?
So Kenta was the name of my grandmother, who I loved dearly, and she was advocating in 1980 publicly that women in Italy, particularly, where there's still a big gap in pay, in job opportunities, and careers, and a lot of things. Very few women after a maternity go back to work. After the second child, hardly any. If they have two, go back to work. My grandmother was advocating that women in 1980 should learn ICT and computer sciences to really be able to close the gap and go ahead. So this is very much the diversity in particular. It's very much an Italian thing, because there's a big gap, and it's a cultural gap, and it's a wrong gap. And so when I went to school in England, I went to university in England, I went to lower school in the US, and I just saw that girls were, if anything, better than boys at maths, for example. Whereas in Italy, only 5% of 15 years old, that's 5% of 15 years old, think they can be as good as boys. It's like a cultural thing. I haven't figured out where it comes from, but I figured out where it starts. And it starts when girls are around 12 and 13, which is right about the age of my daughters. And so I decided I could use some of my networking and kind of passion for getting stuff done to create a new school called STEM for TREAD. So it was the school for the ecological and digital transition. And I wrote a book, a kid's book called Zero, where my two daughters go around Venice on a gondola with a friend of theirs, and my two daughters are clearly a lot smarter than their boy guy. So it's really about getting younger girls to understand that they're actually better at maths, and there's neuroscientific reasons why that is. But it's more about fighting stereotypes that you have in Europe, particularly in Southern Europe.
Yes, and you mentioned your daughters, and I'm interested to know, how are they influencing your life? How are they influencing your work?
As a father, I think the highest moment in fatherhood is when your daughter or daughters say they're proud of you. I think it's like that's kind of what you try to do. I mean, you're looking after them, but you ultimately want them to be happy and proud. And I've been really lucky to have quality time with them as I was writing my book called The Hydrogen Revolution. And so I was explaining to them what I was doing. And then that's when Fridays for Futures was really prominent, also here in Italy. And so we decided together to write a children's book. And so we spent a lot of time on that. It was during COVID, so we had the time. We were, in lockdown at home. We had that quality time to write the book. So this is the cover of the book. These are the two of them, and this was a way to like get them to really understand what I'm doing. I'm not saying they influence my desire to do this, but they're deeply aware of what I'm doing, which means when I come home, I can say where I've been, what I've done, which also helps. Now they're entering teenager years, so it's good to have been able to do this before they become teenagers. And by the way, what my because Abby, you said you have a 4-year-old. What a psychologist friend of mine says is make sure you tell your kids, especially girls, everything you want them to know before they're 12. But but he only told me when one was kind of 11 and a half, so he didn't leave me much time.
No,
But
that's all. Did you pack it all
but,
in?
but I don't I don't really think like I'm doing this to leave a better world for them. I think they will. I'm an optimist. I think they will grow up in a world where fossil fuels have become marginal for cost reasons, and I think they'll live in a world where a social media is less uh, destructive, and AI is a force for the good. And I think breathing properly, meditating, talking openly about it, doing it at work is going to be normal. So I'm quite optimistic for their outlook, with or without me, in my job. I mean,
Well, I hope so, indeed. And I can tell you for certain, fathers leave such a lasting impact on their daughters. I joke and say that my dad is my CLO, my Chief Life Officer.
that's cool.
He's one of my first mentors and continues to be, and has been such a wonderful impact in my life. So it sounds like you're doing the same for your daughters.
I like that. I'll tell them that.
Yes, you should.
Thank you.
Well, so now I'd like to enter into a little bit of a lightning round as I end out our conversations in Invest Insights. Describe yourself in one word.
Joyful,
And why's that?
because I have fun doing what I'm doing, and I think I'm quite good at creating a fellowship and engaging people and motivating them and bringing them along. And I think if you're miserable, it's harder to do that. And I don't know, it just sprung to mind as I breathe to get a response.
How would you define optimism?
I think there's two types of optimism. There's blind optimism, which is dangerous, and there's um, fact-based optimism, or like more rationalized optimism, which is not just straight from the gut. Optimism is an attitude. Optimism is that willingness to not take no as an answer, but you need to hear the no. I think there's also people who don't take no as the answer because they haven't heard it. So I think it's an attitude, but it's a fine line between being stubborn and being optimistic.
What is the most impactful book that you've read?
Wow, that's a hard question to pick one. Many books. Some I can't even remember, but I'm sure they're there. I think two books in particular. One is Alice Miller. I think in English it's called Drama of the Gifted Child. It's really a book about how most of what happens to our, let's say, emotional evolution happens in the first 3 years of our life. And that really drove my attitude as a parent, but also as trying to heal my own vulnerabilities. And the second book is Robert Bly. I think it's called The Little Book of the Human Shadow, something like that. And it's really more about like what happens as we grow up. So I think these are two great books that have deeply influenced me, but there's many, many, many others as well.
What is the best advice you've ever received?
From my dad, to be self-aware and make sure I'm let's say, make sure I partner with people who complement me. And that's in life and business and friendship, like to try to achieve, not try to achieve completeness on my own, but to try to make 1 + 1 = 3.
What makes you happy?
Getting it done is, I think, is the best kept secret of happiness. It's a small things. I don't need much. I need like a nice sunset, a nice view, a nice walk, a nice talk, a nice cup of tea. I think it's those small things.
And if I forget everything that you've said today, what is the one thing you want us to remember?
So the one thing I hope I will teach my girls and my children is that we're all here to be part of the world. We're all here to change the world, and we can all change the world, and everyone can change the world. And you don't need to create huge enterprises to change the world. Sometimes a conversation can change the world, and a conversation at the right time can really change the world. The same way a butterfly can trigger a massive tornado. So we're all butterflies that we can have huge impacts on this world. And so we have a responsibility with it, but also a sense of purpose that we should set out to fulfill our dreams and try to make the world a better place.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I really enjoyed our conversation today. That was Marco Alvera, businessman and energy champion. Marco, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the talk.
You've been watching Invest Insights with Abby Lindenberg. Don't forget to join Abby and her next guest, Avenue Media's Rafael Sansores. Please remember to subscribe, like, and follow. For even greater depth, subscribe to our website to download our annual business reports and register for our all-encompassing newsletter, and never miss a single insight. For Invest Insights, thanks for watching.